question before we get started?
Yep.
Years and years ago, I asked a question of a teacher. If we had the ability, our son was in Afghanistan, and I asked if we had the ability to change someone else's karma, and he said no. So in the last couple of weeks, you have mentioned a couple of times that we are creating the conditions for Lama Zopa quick return. And I think if you have used the word karma in that context, and I'm wondering about that. So, I mean, is that what we're also doing when we do medicine Buddha or any of those practices?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a couple things that's presented as true as I understand it. One is that oneself as an ordinary sentient being doesn't possess any capacity to shift another person's karma at all, aside from maybe pointing them, just like the Buddhas. You can kind of say, well, maybe stop stealing, or maybe you can try to be helpful and help them kind of adopt better, more productive, and in that way you can shift. Or even if things are kind of they're relatively normal, still you can encourage like even more virtue and so on. And or leading by example, maybe they decide, oh, that seems to be working for that person, and so in that way we can impact. But by hoping or wanting or desiring that another person's karma be shifted, like preventing a certain karma from ripening, or whatever, we have no ability to do that. Enlightened beings also don't have the ability to generate a karmic seed in the mind of a person, but they do have the capacity to help to activate or ripen an existing karmic seed that person has already established, perhaps in a previous life, not necessarily in this life, but they can kind of work with the karmic seeds that are there. They can't establish, they can't make there be a new one, but if there's a positive karmic seed that's there, perhaps under certain circumstances, they can help to activate that positive karma, which might overwhelm a negative karma or delay the ripening of a negative karma. Because if that virtuous karmic seed is more powerful, than a negative karma that might have ripened or is ripening, then that can ameliorate the negative karma that's ripening. So in that sense, when we make prayers, like you're saying, to Medicine Buddha or to Tara, we're relying on the enlightened mind, enlightened activity to help to activate karmic potentials that are in our minds, and potentially even in the minds of others. It's they do say in general that there's the caveats with all of these sorts of things. It's in terms of like Medicine Buddha puja and things, ideally the person who needs the intervention, if you will, would actually be engaging in the puja, actually trying to make that connection themselves. That's going to be more likely, that's more powerful than they're not connected, they have no idea, but you're just sort of hoping that you're kind of interceding. And then I would imagine too that the kind of practitioner has a role, because they talk about, a person with calm abiding, a person without calm abiding, a bodhisattva, an ordinary sentient being, someone who's directly perceived emptiness, someone who hasn't directly perceived emptiness. Those are all going to play a role in the power of prayer, in the power, because a bodhisattva's prayers versus an ordinary person's, and it's not like, because, oh, this is fair and that's not fair. And it's just the nature of the mind. If the mind is more concentrated, if the mind is freer from delusion, if the mind is more powerful, then the energy of that is stronger versus, there's a lot of distraction, there's a lot of negativity, then the power of that is just not as strong. So, it's not like the Buddhas are rewarding some people and not rewarding, other people in terms of, it's just generally speaking, there's a difference between, what that person's bringing to that practice. But, we are where we are. And so, all we can do is rely on, just engage with the power of the practice wherever it is that we are in that process. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's begin by establishing our motivation. Thinking that these meditations are an effort to follow Khandrola's advice on beneficial practices during particularly the 49 days since Lama Zopa Rinpoche's entering of clear light meditation. His final clear light meditation. We recognize that Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself devoted his life to encouraging Lamrim realizations, and so we follow the Guru's advice as well. So we develop this mind of confidence, faith, in the instructions that we have been given. Thinking that by following those instructions, the causes and the conditions for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's swift return will be brought about in our world. This is our contribution. All right, and with that motivation, we'll get into a stable, comfortable, upright position serviceable for meditation. So we think about keeping our feet flat and our back straight. Torso open, hands in the lap right over left, with the palms upturned and the thumbs gently touching. Our eyes are gently closed or slightly open. Making sure that we let in enough light to remain alert. We try to avoid slouching or leaning. We also let go of any unnecessary rigidity in the body. relaxing into a stable, comfortable, upright position. And we start to let go of attending to the environment, constraining our awareness just to the body and mind. Concentrating that awareness in the present moment by attending closely to the physical sensation of the air moving into and back out of the tip of the nostrils. Noticing quickly when anything other than that one physical sensation is arising in the mind, and without judgment or frustration, lifting our awareness up from that distraction and placing it gently but firmly again and again on the breath. Then we'll continue with Lama Zopa Rinpoche's Mahayana equilibrium meditation. The next point in the meditation, Lama Zopa writes, if that ignorant self, I, conception, and all of its objects were true, these three distinctions of friend, enemy, and stranger should exist from countless previous lives to the present and even beyond enlightenment. This contradicts the significance of Buddhahood, for the enlightened being is called Buddha because his wonderful, sublime knowledge has not a tiny atom of the delusions and illusions that cause such discriminations. Therefore, the fully understanding one showed his compassionate method, the equilibrium meditation, to free me from delusions, illusions, and discriminations. The discriminations are not true because that conception and its objects are totally elusive. There is no self, I. So here we reflect on the relationship between our not having realized emptiness and the arising of the labels of friend, enemy, and stranger, all of which are empowered by grasping at a self. We exaggerate what's pleasant to the self, what's unpleasant to the self, and what's of no consequence, what's neutral. This is empowered by assenting to a concretized ego identity, believing it to be true. And although that has characterized all of our time and cyclic existence, it does not characterize the mind of a Buddha. A Buddha is completely free of these empowering conditions that give rise to these deluded ways of thinking. Lama Zopa writes, "My afflictions are not created by the enemy, but by myself. In my previous lives, I afflicted others through ignorance, and the results of this return during my present life. As the sutra says, I have killed all of you before and was chopped up by all of you in previous lives. We have all killed each other as enemies. So why should we be attached to each other?" Chandrakirti says, "It is very foolish and ignorant to retaliate with spite in the hope of ending the attack of the enemy, because the retaliation itself only brings more suffering. Therefore, there is no reason to retaliate." So here we can see further that due to the operation of ignorance in the mind, we engage in mistaken karmic actions, creating negative karmic seeds in the mind, which ripen in future lives. And sentient beings rise up in a way that appears to the mind as an enemy due to the functioning of these karmic relationships. But as the Buddha says, hatred is never overcome with hatred, but only by love. This is an ancient an unalterable law. So pause here and contemplate, using our own direct experience, the ways in which we place an undue importance on what seems pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And we look for pleasant actions, unpleasant actions, and neutral actions in the behaviors of others, and subsequently categorize them as friend, enemy, and stranger. And all of this flows from our ordinary mind. So that is one way of taking responsibility for our actions. We can further refine that through the understanding of karma. Recognizing that any harm that we receive is the ripening result of a negative action. And although we don't have to regard that as our fault, it is still our responsibility. We are the only ones who can shift our own karma, the karma that we may have inherited from past mistaken action, and yet it's still up to us. So here we contemplate both conventionally in terms of adding fuel to the fire of a difficult circumstance by responding with further anger or aggression. Seeing as how even just in the moment, that's an unskillful response. But then also seeing how we lay down the seeds of future suffering as well. So here contemplate examples again from one's own life. Perhaps times when we didn't have the ability to respond in the most appropriate way. And then times when we were able to respond in a more appropriate way to a difficult circumstance, and compare. Try to demonstrate that patience and loving kindness, compassion, generosity help to shift things in a beneficial way. And then we'll begin contemplating other ways of reinterpreting difficult circumstances that can lead to more appropriate ways of responding. So we can begin by considering that the difficult person, the person who agitates our mind, is the object of our practice of patience. And people who disturb the mind provide the mechanism, the vehicle for our practice of patience, which, if we wish to achieve enlightenment, we must perfect. So if we ourselves chose the goal of enlightenment, then it is these agitating, disturbing, sentient beings that are providing the mechanism for us to reach our own goal. Lama Zopa writes, "The enemy is infinitely more precious than any possession. He is the source of my past, present, and future lives' happiness." He writes, "I should never hate. Any material possession can be given up for his peace." Lama Zopa continues, "The enemy is my greatest need. He is the cause of all beings' enlightenment, including mine. He is my best possession. For his peace, I can give up myself. From now on, I must never hate nor harm the enemy, nor any other being." So, in the same way that we can recognize that there are benefits to perhaps exercise, eating certain foods, we may not enjoy engaging in those momentary processes, but we see the benefit. There's some difficulty, but there's long-term benefit. And here the benefit is not just health or longevity, but complete enlightenment, the greatest benefit of any. So try to recollect in your experience people who've agitated your mind, perhaps picking smaller examples, noticing what arises in the mind. And you contemplate their words, their deeds, and see if you can relate to those, seeing them as necessary for your own growth and development. A momentary challenge that brings incredible reward. Lama Zopa presents another way of training the mind when he writes, "The enemy harming me physically and mentally is under the control of his negative mind. He is like a stick which someone uses to beat another. There is no reason to get angry, harming the person in retaliation. It is not his fault, as the pain of the beating is not the fault of the stick." So, in the same way that we concretize and exaggerate ourselves, we also concretize and exaggerate the other, leaving no space between the person and the afflictions arising within their mind. Just like we ourselves sometimes lose control, say things that we don't mean, that we regret, do things that we regret. So too do other sentient beings get swept away by the arising of strong afflicted states. So we should develop a disdain for afflictions rather than the sentient beings afflicted by them, recognizing that the cure is achieving enlightenment and bringing all sentient beings to enlightenment as well. So try to examine your experiences with the arising of affliction in your own mind and in the minds of others, and try to give rise to an insight that allows for spaciousness, seeing the sentient being and the arising of the afflicted state as separate entities. And then the last contemplation for today, Lama Zopa writes, "If I had clear wisdom, I would see that harming others with hate is in fact harming myself with hate. Obviously, I should not do it. So here we recognize that these tendencies, these impulses are within our own mind. And each time that we strengthen that tendency, that habit, we create karma that we ourselves will inherit, sowing the seeds of our own suffering. Each time making it more and more likely that we will find it easier to respond with anger rather than with patience. So here again, try to analyze and see how by engaging or giving in to these afflicted states, it's primarily oneself that's harmed. We're bound to cyclic existence through the arising of the afflicted states. So try to recognize, even if I want to benefit myself, I must give up responding with hatred. And then when you are ready, we'll come back together. And we'll conclude with the swift return prayers. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Prajeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And Conjura's prayer. Guru, think of me. Guru, consider me. Gracious Guru, care for me. Guru, most gracious and kind, do not deprive us of your compassionate refuge. Listen and consider this heartfelt prayer made by a tormented disciple. Guru, you embody the blessings of the Buddhas of the three times. You may rest in great bliss, equipoise within the dhatu of unimpeded luminosity. Yet the playful dance of your loving compassion can emanate in myriad ways. The swift appearance of your magical wisdom, the Rupakaya. The time has come for you to care for us once again with your affectionate compassion. I invoke you, I call upon you, I implore you on behalf of all beings. Arise, arise, arise from the Dharmakaya. Do not rest in Kichara or other pure celestial realms. Rather, to benefit the Buddha's teachings and all living beings, swiftly return to this southern continent to spread the Buddha Dharma of study and realization. Quickly return to guide us poor, wretched beings. Such is the desperate cry of us, your disciples. Return so that we may actually behold your presence and receive the blessings of your enlightened body, speech, and mind. All violations, errors, mistakes, and broken samaya that we have made in relation to your spontaneously present, awakened body, speech, mind, and activity, through our being baffled, confused, and conceiving things in erroneous ways, we confess within the luminous emptiness of your three kayas. Of everything auspicious, the supreme auspiciousness, may there be the auspiciousness of emptiness and compassion conjoined, and the auspiciousness of a timely meeting between master and disciples. Through the force of the truth of unchanging suchness, may the unmistaken incarnation return quickly. This lament was made by me, a Dakini, with pure faith in Samaya, her eyes filled with tears of sorrow. May these wishes of a beggar woman be fulfilled through the blessings of the deities of the three roots. Perception, its object, and the act of perceiving all dissolve within the expanse, the blissful clarity of suchness. So pause in that energy of dedication and reflect on our efforts the merit created, and generate again that faith in Ganjala's advice and clearly see the ripening result of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's swift return, dedicating all of our efforts to that ripening result. All right.
Have you got time for a question?
Sure.
I'll try to put it together in a way that makes sense. If the self is an illusion, it's a construct in the conventional sense of causes and conditions, yet there's that very subtle drop, which is beginningless, endless, takes us, it is us from life to life, reincarnation to reincarnation. So there's individuation. How do you think of that other than I?
So what does travel from, so of course the mind or consciousness is something that exists, is an existent phenomena. It's not a made up phenomena. It's not a non-existent phenomena. But a self, the way that we perceive of ourselves, is body and mind together, as if that is something that started, at the moment of our birth, and then when we go through the death process, if we generate no insight, into the nature of ourself, then the death process is experienced as a real kind of dissolution of, or a real kind of ending of how we are perceiving of ourselves. So what does travel from life to life are the collected karmic tendencies that we've accumulated that have not yet been expressed, because once they've burned out, maybe they were created and then they were ripened and then they're gone, in that sense. But we have this unripened store of karmic seeds, karmic potentials, and that does travel, as you say, from life to life. But that isn't how we understand ourselves. It isn't that realizing emptiness is a complete negation. It's a negation of an overly concretized identity, of a truly existent identity, one that seems not to, because all of those individual karmic seeds had causes and conditions. There were a myriad of inputs and outputs that gave rise to all of those. And they even are the reason, Lama Yeshe says that, we are karma, that even our body is the result of karmic seeds ripening. So the reason that we have access to resources, the reason that we, on balance, are healthy or sickly, or, that's all the ripening of karmic causes and conditions. And if we experienced ourselves in that way, as all of these fleeting, ripening, momentary causes and conditions, we would be much closer to being on the right track. But that's not the I that appears to an ordinary mind. The I that appears to the mind is a much more concretized identity that seems not to have any support or need any support. And it seems to be causeless and just sort of this monolithic thing that sometimes we identify with the body, sometimes we identify with the mind, and at all times we think is the owner of both body and mind, as if it's a third category. It's set up to be the puppeteer of body and mind, like we need some sort of third, because sometimes we think I'm happy, sometimes we think I'm sad, sometimes we think I'm in pain, but the body is in pain. The knee is in pain. It's not the mind isn't in pain, the body is in pain. And when the mind is sad, the body's not sad. The mind is sad, or the mind is depressed, or the mind is elated. And yet, all of these disparate conditions we're able to think of as being the I, being the self. And it can't be like that. It can't be that there is an I that is both body and mind if, when you look for that I, it's not findable in either the body or the mind. If you search for the I in the body and you search for the I in the mind, and you get to a point where you're like, well, no, it's in none of these places, then you're left with what everything that we are is a collection of non-I. And logically, you can't combine a whole bunch of things that are not I and say, well, now I have a truly existent I. Now I have something that's findable and pointable, that is the owner of body and mind, unless you postulate that the I can exist completely divorced from body and mind, which you can look for the I there too. But if the I could be found there, then that would imply that we could have experiences that depend on neither the body nor the mind. And that is not our experience. We've never actually had that experience. Every time that the I has arisen, either the body or the mind or both have been involved. And so basically, once you cause the way that the I appears to the mind to arise very strongly, and you're like, okay, this is how I appear to myself. And if I'm understanding this in a valid, accurate, reasonable, logical way, then I should be able to say this is what's giving rise to that. Just like if you smelled something in a room and you're like, okay, well, I'm smelling this. Either I'm hallucinating, or something is causing this. And if something is causing this, I should be able to look around, move around, and be like, oh, this is the thing. This is the origin. This is the source. This is why this experience is arising. And that's all Buddhism is saying we should be able to do with the I. Given that we have this experience of an identity that appears to the mind to be owner of body and mind, then we should be able to say, this is why, this is where its origin is. But no one who's ever looked for the origin of the I has ever found it. And we can't, we have to do that for ourselves. We can't rely simply on that. We have to look for it ourselves and say, okay, well, here's all of the parts of the body, here are all of the parts of the mind. And is it, when I think about that particular part of body or mind, can I say that it is what is giving rise to my ego identity? And it's not. There is body, there is mind, and they are associated. But that association is only for one lifetime, and then a different body will arise. And so it isn't to say that nothing exists, but it is to say that how the self exists is so different than how the self appears to an ordinary mind to exist, is that that ordinary appearance is like a complete hallucination. Like there's no, because that ordinary appearance has no appreciation of all of the causes and the conditions that have given rise to the I, and has no appreciation for the fact that the I is being labeled upon a specific body in combination with not just the mind, but the aspects of the mind that are accessible to an ordinary, because we don't have access even to all of the levels of our mind. Our mind goes to very, very deep states that we don't really even have access to. So really, the aspect of the mind that we have access to is really our preferences, our likes, our dislikes, our our habits, our tendencies, which is a very coarse level of the mind. And yet we think that's kind of all that there is to the mind. And so and even the body, the body has changed over the course of our lives, is continuing to change. But at each moment of that, when we were 2, when we were 12, when we were 30, we thought, that the I was unchanging, that the I was self-established, but it's postulated independence upon body and mind, both of which have changed drastically over that 30, 40, 50, 70, years, and continues to change. And yet we're able to paper over all of those changes kind of in a fictitious way, because they're so slow. They don't happen day by day. They happen, over time. And so in each moment, we're able to concretize that moment, even though in 10 years, the basis of designation of body and mind is really entirely different than the basis of designation of the I of 10 years previous. But in our fictitious sort of way of doing that, both of those points in time seem like still me, still I. So we don't want to negate too much and say that there is no self, but that the I that does appear to an ordinary mind is so drastically different than a valid way of conceiving of the I that it's like an illusion or like a hallucination.
Thank you. I think that I understand the inherent existence of Chris Norman.
Sorry, you froze again.
I guess my question is more on that subtle level. How do we describe, or how do we cognize that essence that is us from lifetime to lifetime, or is the carrier of our karma? Because there is, I believe there is something that carries our karma from lifetime to lifetime. How do you describe it if you don't describe it? I know it's on a subtle level as I.
There you would describe it as the merely imputed I, the merely labeled I, which is because we designate the false I in dependence upon, because again, it's really, and I think it's also true that Buddhism isn't encouraging us necessarily, because I think there's perhaps a danger of just looking for something else to concretize, when we do that, because what we're meant to do really is just, in terms of the actual realization that Buddhism is encouraging us to have, is to cause the false I to arise, and then to look for it, and then to not find it, and then to just rest in the unfindability of that false I, to see through that false I. And that's uncomfortable, and so there might be a tendency to try to just find something else to say, okay, well, I'm not that, but I really am this. And Buddhism doesn't want us to try to do that. Buddhism wants us only to rest in the unfindability of the false I, the sort of that groundlessness. That's all we need to do in order to achieve enlightenment. We need to do that with a mind that has developed single-pointed concentration, of course, in order to actually achieve enlightenment. But even without that, there's still benefits. We still accrue karmic, there's still beneficial karmic seeds that are laid down whenever we try to contemplate that or any other positive mental state. But yeah, I mean, if we were to think about, like I said, I think that there is a danger of trying to grasp on to something. But if we were to try to characterize, intellectually, what we would say is that our karma is always in flux. We're always adding new karmas, both positive and negative. Karmic seeds are always ripening, both positive and negative. So this energy that is traveling is entirely dynamic. It's never the same in any two moments. And so it's a collection of, kind of in a way like, like boiling water, in a way like all of the billions of bubbles of, some are being created, some are popping, some are traveling through the column of water. The water is evaporating, and maybe, you're adding water at the same time. And, but it's just this system. It's just this sort of energetic system that is always, in flux and never the same in any two moments, because things can be empty of inherent existence and yet still function. So the I, just like a car is empty of inherent existence, but if you want to go to the supermarket, you're going to get in your car. It's a thing, it functions, but it doesn't exist inherently. We don't want to negate too much and say that there's nothing there, but it's not a car from its own side. It depends on causes and conditions. It depends on parts. It depends on an act of mental imputation, mental labeling. So, we function to create karma, to perhaps purify karma, to, experience karma, but the I that causes trouble, the I that binds us to samsara, is the false I, is the overly concretized I. And we overcome that simply by resting in the unfindability of that I.
So essentially, don't worry about it.
In a way.
Well, we intellectualize so much because, our brain way and our minds are built that way. It sounds too like we've been given all these tools to realize these important points. If we can remind ourselves of emptiness, and remind ourselves of karma, and things, even your description of the boiling water, all of those things help us to remind ourselves of reality. So thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'll be out of town next week, which is why this isn't on the schedule for next week. And so then I believe it's the 5th is when we'll start with karma, the next chapter. We'll be ending this period of the longer meditations and moving back into the regular course. So we'll start with karma, I think, on the 5th. I believe that's Monday the 5th, which is after. So I won't see you guys until after Sakadawa Duchen. So have a great Sakadawa Duchen. We have precepts that day, and a Shakyamuni Buddha meditation that day that Geshe is leading. So we have some stuff on that Sunday.
Safe travels.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Venerable Dondra.